Fenirob here. This is my friend Jess. Jess is a little bit drunk. I call this Conversations with Jess. In today's episode, we're going to be drinking the Black Pearl from Fall Line Brewing Company here in Macon, Georgia. It's their 1-year anniversary, and this is a special release. It is a rum barrel-aged coconut imperial stout.
I like imperial stouts. I don't particularly like coconuts, but there we go. But something tells me I'm going to like this. Cheers.
Well, today we're going to be talking about the Birth of series from Academy Games. There's 4 games in this series. 3 of them are based in America, and one of them is in England, but it has Vikings. So Jess here has played all of these games, as have I. I'm a big fan of the series. I think you are as well.
Yeah,
most of it.
You introduced me to the series, and I'm a big fan.
Take it away.
All right. Well, I guess to start this off, what the Birth of series does really well, I think, is they take the war game format, but keep it relatively simple, stupid. You have generally two types of troops, and you have little cubes that represent your troops, and the only difference between these troops are what die you get to roll when you have combat. And more elite troops roll dice that you have better outcomes with, and that's it. When you have a fight, you have 2 green and 1 blue. You roll, 2 green die and 1 blue die and see what you get. The resolution and the rules and everything are very straightforward, but you still have a big avenue of strategy on how to go about things.
There's no charts.
There's no charts.
No chits.
There's no, as a Warhammer player, there's no source books that you have to do for each individual unit, special rules and all that. It's all very straightforward. There's cards you can play that kind of change things or influence things, but for the most part, it's just you managing your units, moving them around in ways that benefit you, and having these battles. And it's a way that's very elegant to me and just very fun.
Well, I always thought that the idea of a war game is usually better than the implementation of the war game. The first time you bump a table and stacks of cardboard go flying, that's pretty much the end for me. The first time I roll some 6-sided dice and I have to refer to this big chart that tells me this and attrition and all this other stuff, I'm out. As soon as that happens, I'm out. In this game, in this series of games, they do really the best job of having someone like me actually play a war game.
Yes.
We'll go ahead and move this amazing beer. What do you think?
I like it. I'm a fan. Anything Imperial is going to be a plus in the book. All right, so this is the first one I played, 1754, the French and Indian War. The way these games work is you generally have 2 sides. In this case, it's the French and the English, and each side will have 2 different factions. And I forget what it is on this one. I think it's militia and official military for each side.
I think there's Canadian.
There's Canadian militia, and then actual legitimate French troops, and then you have the colonists and the redcoats. And what's brilliant about this is it can play at 4 players. Most war games are really 2-player games.
It's a legit 4-player game.
It is a 4-player game, and the way it works is you have an initiative track that works different each time. You have a little baggie that has each color corresponds to a different faction. There's 2 factions for each side. And you pull the thing that determines who gets to go this turn.
But it's truly cooperative in that you can look at each other's cards, you can talk about what you want to do, you can work together, but ultimately the person whose turn it is gets the final say, and they must use at least one of their cubes when they move.
So each player, when their turn comes up, gets a lot of options to get to go. It never felt like anyone was a quarterback. No one was just telling their partner what to do. Each time I played one of these games, it felt like everyone kind of had equal say in what to do and what to go.
What the goo?
What the goo?
Legitimately can play it as a 2-player game.
Yes, it works fine as 2-player.
And you could actually play it as a 3-player game where 2 people take control and 1 person has the whole other side.
You can. I think I'd rather play it as 2 or 4, but you can play it as 3 just because I think it works better when you have the kind of even sides. But you can play it as 3. There's no real issue with it.
Let's talk specifically about 1754.
1754, it has a really interesting map. It's mainly the Northern Territories because it's the French and Indian War. but it's a different perspective from what you normally see. Whoever goes to those territories first kind of wins them to their cause and gains them as troops, and they're pretty effective fighters. So it's almost like a race to get the help from the natives first. And then if you have both people with natives and they kind of cancel each other out.
The natives really don't want to fight.
They don't want to fight each other.
The other thing about this game that I think is interesting, and really with all of the Birth of series, that 1754's map leads to a strategic kind of fight to me. Mm-hmm. When you get to 1775, which we haven't gotten to obviously, but that one seems to have many different fronts. I mean, it's a little bit, nuts when it comes to trying to figure out where you're going to protect, which also makes it great and historically accurate, which I think at the end of the day is what I love the most about these games, is that they really teach me about history. This is not something that was really covered extensively in my schooling, but man, I've learned a lot about this whole thing, and it really gives you a different perspective on some of these things that you just are a blip in our history.
Yeah, in history books, this 1754 is kind of treated like an exhibition match to the main event of the Revolutionary War.
Right.
You kind of gloss over 1754 to get to this,
right.
the good one.
It's very interesting.
So this is my second favorite of the series.
Yeah, I think overall it's probably my second favorite, but as far as actual strategy goes, I think the battle lines are drawn, and most of it is a straight on sort of focus, breaking through kind of breaking through these 3 points. Whereas when we get to 1812, I have a similar feeling, but we can talk about that when we're done. So what do you think about this?
I think this is a very good game. I think you should check it out if you're just even a little bit interested in war games. I think this is a good one to look into.
All right, what's next?
Next is 1812, which is the second game I played, because we're kind of doing this to order the number I played it. And this one is very similar to 1754. Obviously, it's a different war. The big difference on this one, it has a weird thing where you can actually go to 5 players, because on this one faction has 3 potential spots.
The Native Americans
are
kind of pick a side.
In this one.
So you could actually play this game with 5 players.
You can play with 5 players, and we did it one time.
But it seems like that the
native players are a lot more hobbled compared to the other players. You get less options.
They're almost auxiliary.
Yeah, exactly. They're auxiliary troops, so it's not fun to be a native player.
But when we played this, the one I think you're speaking of, the person who played the Native Americans actually was the one person who really didn't know kind of what was going on.
Which is probably for the best.
Right, and he was able to then, kind of learn as he went without harming the experience for the rest of us.
This is my second to least favorite, and the reason is kind of the opposite of what you were saying before. In this game, it felt like there's 2 battlefronts. There's 2 spots in this map that you're going to have big fights and big contention over. And to me, that makes the game a little bit boring, a little bit obvious of where the fights are going to happen, and that's not as fun to me. I like the games where you have more options of where the fights are going to happen, or crazy things that can happen. And this one just felt like a big slobber knocker in these 2 areas.
I believe this was the first game actually in the series.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I do think that there are a couple of points in the game where if you've played the later ones, you start to think this seems like a slightly antiquated.
Yeah, and they kind of figured out things as they went.
Right. But what I do love about this game, I think, and I wish I'd spent more time with this game, but I think because the other ones tend to be thought of as better, we play the other ones more.
Yeah.
But I do think the reinforcement mechanism in this game, even though you definitely have, historically, this was Canada and the United States were basically the line of the battle line. And you're right, it's pretty obvious that that's where the action's going to happen. But getting your reinforcements to the front line is kind of an interesting mechanic in this game.
Yeah, we have not even talked about how reinforcements work in this game. So one of the results you can get on your die when you roll your battle dice is that your units just run the hell away. So they go into this little section of the map that's the reinforcements map, which is bad because your units run away from the board, but it's kind of good because the next time it's your turn, you get to add them back to the map.
That's right.
In certain areas. So that can actually end up kind of, working out in your benefit in the long run if it works out for you.
And, we should have mentioned this earlier, but when I was talking about the charts and graphs that usually occur in, are part of a war game, traditional war game, in this series, that's handled by the dice.
Yes.
The probabilities are handled by the dice. For instance, we were just talking about reinforcements. It's a fleeing mechanic that's on the die. The trained military troops, the professional troops, like the French regulars or the British regulars, they never flee. Right? Yeah. They either hit half the time or they can strategically retreat.
That's one thing I mentioned. There's one result in the die that's like a withdrawal, which is not quite the same as fleeing because you can move into a different area. And the different games have different rules on where you can move into it.
It's like a controlled retreat.
But sometimes you can actually use that controlled retreat to your advantage.
Absolutely.
And that is brilliant.
I've definitely lost at least one game of 1754 that way. And it was my fault, but it didn't make it any less upsetting. Yeah. But I think 1812 is the kind of foundation upon which the rest of the series is
I didn't realize it was also. I just read on the back here, it's the Grognard Historian Board Game of the Year. Grognard. That's mean like hardcore, like graybeard, like, all the neck.
I use the French pronunciation, by the way. Grognard.
Grognard.
And I don't know why anyone wouldn't think that the mechanisms in these war games actually, nostalgia aside, aren't infinitely actually times better than the old school chits and charts.
I would recommend this game 9 times out of 9, if not for the next game on our list.
What is that game?
That is 1775. This, not that the other games are bad, because I love all of these games. Well, most of these games. But this is far and away my favorite of them that I've played. I would play this every day, all day.
I agree, actually.
As you can probably guess, this is about the American Revolution. Just give me a sec. And what really sets this one apart from the others is that there's this area control element to it. You have the most troops in each colony. And
right, so I'll flip this around so you can see multiple areas in here. But basically, in order to have control of this, only your troops can be in that area. Even if you don't occupy each of the areas, you must be the only ones in New York to get the benefit of controlling that territory. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. Like if you control, and that makes the area control element just makes it more strategic. Plus, unlike the other games, there aren't just a couple of areas that you're going to be conflicting. The map is way more open. There's a lot more ways to sneak troops around behind enemy lines to attack areas that your opponent's not expecting. So it's a lot more chaotic or interactive that way. They do a rule in most of the other games when you do that strategic withdrawal. You have to withdraw into a spot where you control the area or you have at least one troop.
Right.
And this one, you can withdraw into any neutral area.
Right.
So that means you can actually potentially go behind enemy lines with your strategic withdrawal. And that just opens things up completely to all kinds of cool plays.
The sea moves, the water moves.
Yes, move anywhere along the coast, and that's what opens it up.
And so that's an interesting mechanic that kind of makes this game less of a clear line of battle. All right, so 1775 is your favorite?
Yes, this is my favorite far and wide.
Mine too. I think at the end of the day, it is my favorite total game, although I still say 1754 has the better map for fighting.
I still like this one, but I respect that opinion.
All right. Well, that leaves us with only one, and I think we're going to have a difference of opinion.
Yeah, this is where I think we're going to have some controversy. This is 878 Vikings. This is a medieval game about the Viking invasion of England, which I love medieval shit and I love Viking shit. I'm a sucker for it.
Right.
And so I was all about this game because I already played these other games. I knew I loved this system. So I'm like, oh, I gotta buy this. I gotta buy this without even looking at it.
You love Vikings. You love the birth of.
Yeah, and I love the birth of series, so I buy this. And this is a heartbreaker for me because it is not the same. It is not the same game as the others.
It's not the same, but I don't think that makes it a bad game.
I kind of do because I don't feel like this one is as well designed. And I'll go into a couple different things. One, the main difference between this one and the other games is, unlike the other games, you have two different sides that are way different. The Vikings do not build troops. You have to rely on these invasion cards that give you a lot of troops at once, but you don't build any troops beyond that. And the English are constantly building troops in their own kingdom if they still control those city-states. And I've played this game multiple times. I've played it on the Viking side, and I've played it on the English side. And every time, the English just dominate. And it got me to the point I was reading and rereading the instruction book. Like, have I missed a rule? Am I missing something here? Because it just feels like the English have a big advantage in this game because they can build troops, or the Vikings are reliant on the fleet card that they draw.
I can't disagree on the grounds that the Vikings are harder to win with, but I have actually won with the Vikings. But some games are geared towards one side actually having an advantage. There's a game called Mr. Jack.
Yeah, I played Pocket Jack.
It is easier to win the game as the investigators than it is as Jack. It's like 60-40 if everyone knows what's going on. I feel like this game is similar in that to win as the Vikings, it's almost like the difficulty of a cooperative game where things have to go your way and you have to play smart.
Yeah.
And all these things have to line up for you to do that. But I don't mind as much after the first time I played the game as the English. First time I played it as the English, I whined for about an hour and a half.
That's the game you and me played, and I was playing as the Vikings, and I was rolling really well during the first half of the game.
Right.
And that got you to whining. And the nature of the game is the Vikings tend to do well in the first half anyway.
I didn't know that because it was the first time I played the game.
But after the first half, my rolls started getting worse, and your rolls got better, and the nature of the game kind of took effect, and the English ended up winning. And that's I think it's the biggest issue with this game. Like, even when I was rolling well, the Vikings were doing poorly because if you overextend, then you're vulnerable to an English counterattack. But if you're too conservative as the Vikings, the England, especially in southern England, are going to just build up this massive force because they're constantly building troops, and then they're going to make a wave and just take you out. And I've tried invading northern England where their forces are weak. I've tried invading southern England where the forces are strong, but if you take them out, you cripple their long-term ability.
Right.
I've even tried invading the middle of England and spreading out from there. And no matter what happens, it feels like the England is too strong.
I understand your point there, and I do think you're actually correct in that in any of those situations, if a few dice rolls had gone the other way, I think you would have had a chance to win. But if they don't, if everything doesn't go like you want it to go or need it to go, you're not going to win this, whereas the other games in the series tend to be more balanced.
Yes.
And that's fine, and I can understand why someone would play this game and really be upset, especially when they're playing the Vikings. Again, as the English, the first time I played it, I was very upset, and I ended up winning.
Yeah.
But this game, I think it's unapologetically unbalanced, and that's okay for me, knowing that's what I'm getting into. Now, if you and I were playing a game, we wouldn't probably play this one.
I'd probably make you play 1775.
Right, because we're equally matched in knowledge of how these birth of series work. And this game really seems to me to be designed to allow the player who is not as familiar or as good at these type of games to sort of get a better chance to win. They have it's almost like they get like a golf handicap or something, where they get extra points to start out if they're playing as the English. But I like the challenge of trying to beat someone as the Vikings. Doesn't bother me.
Well, that's reason one why I think this is the inferior version of the game. Reason two is they add this mechanic called leaders, which one of the things I love about the Birth of series is that the rules are relatively simple. The movement rules on how you move troops and how you deploy troops are relatively simple. And leaders just kind of throw it out the window. Leaders add a lot of convoluted mechanics and how movement and deploying works. And I don't think that's really warranted. But the Vikings get more leaders, and that's supposed to. I think that's supposed to be the balancing factor. The Vikings
That's
get
their
leaders.
recruiting.
Vikings get leaders, and the English only get one leader, and that they get more advantages, the movement and deployment. But it just adds an unnecessary wrinkle in it to me.
I get that. I do think it has its merit in the series, and I kind of want to hold off on giving my ultimate view of this game to see if they come out with any more of these. Because 1812, if it was by itself, I would have a different opinion of it, I think, than if I saw 1754.
The fact that this came after 1775 and it's just inferior to it is frustrating to me.
I would call it different as opposed to inferior.
By the way, this is the third reason why I think this is inferior to it. Is on the 4-player count. For the English, it's fine. 2 players as English are going to have just a gay old time, but 2 players as Vikings, because you have the first Viking card comes in. It's generally going to be the fleet, and that player gets to have a lot of fun because they get all these troops they get to do a lot with. You get a whole bunch of troops. You get to rampage all over the map. Whoever gets the second player is going to have less fun because they have less troops to work with, and whoever plays the Berserker is going to have less fun because the way the Viking factions are sorted is regular Norsemen and there's the Berserkers. And as a historian, they'll debate whether the Berserkers actually existed or not, but the fact that the second faction is kind of weird. Anyway, the Berserkers are so few, comparatively on the board. There's half the number of Berserkers than there are regular Norsemen.
Okay, so
whoever gets the Berserkers are going to have way limited options of what they can do. But Berserker turns, their limited Berserker turns are like, well, I have nothing to do, I pass.
Well, why wouldn't this then be a better 3-player game than, like you had spoken earlier, that the 3-player game
honestly, it might have been a better 3-player game. I would not recommend anyone play this game 4-player. Because whoever gets the Berserker is probably not going to have a lot of fun because they're not going to have a lot to do.
Okay. Hey, look, I think for what it's worth, this game is fine, and I would play it, certainly, over a lot of other games that exist. We've always differed about this game, and that's fine.
And I came in wanting to love this game. I was biased to love this kind of game. But I see no reason to play this game when 1775 exists.
There we go. So that's it for the Birth of series.
That was Macon, Georgia, representing.
I'm telling you, it's pretty good. Doug is the brewer, and he makes really good beer.
Where's Fall Line, exactly? Is that downtown?
It's on Plum Street. Also in Macon, Georgia, where we're filming from, is the Madrigal Inn for board game nerds.
Yeah, and you can go to Dice Drop Games and buy all these board games.
Great prices.
Yeah.
Huge selection. Huge.
You may even see me there.
Great.